what it's doing is really just showing how the entirety of the Lam Rim, which is all of Buddha's vast teachings on the way things exist, presenting them in the framework of they're all leading inexorably to the understanding of dependent arising, how all the teachings are leading us to realize dependent arising. And this is very logical. I mean, we're not used to thinking this in spiritual teachings, but we're very used to thinking this in, say, if you're studying math and you get inspired by Einstein and you've decided you want to learn about relativity, well, you know that you're going to start grade 1. 1 + 1 is 2. Then you're going to gradually get more complicated in your math and more complicated, and eventually you'll get to understanding the more subtle levels of physics, whatever they are now. Who knows? Maybe they've chucked out relativity. I don't know. But you understand perfectly well, and the same with your body, the knowledge about music, about cooking. Everything in this course is ordered, isn't it, in such a way that it leads you step by step to the more advanced stuff. That's really logical, and that's what we call learning, and we totally take it for granted. But I think even though we hear this term Lam Rim, in Tibetan, we know, yeah, it's all the teachings. Okay. It's all ordered. It's lower scope, middle scope, great scope. Yeah. But we don't quite get it. The penny doesn't drop for us, And in other words, it's all these teachings. I mean, we know, for example, about karma, but I guarantee many of us might not be sure. Is that lower scope, middle scope, great scope? Where does compassion fit? Where does bodhicitta fit? Where does emptiness fit? Where does the learning about the delusions and the causes of suffering? We're just not so clear because it's hard for us to think about this. I think we give all the teachings in Buddhism kind of equal status. You read about bodhicitta, oh, that's Buddhism. Oh, there's Buddhism. That's karma. That's Buddhism. But to see them in an orderly way, and to see that you have to realize one before you realize the other, I think still that's a bit of a surprise to us, and it really takes us time psychologically to understand that. Oddly enough, I mean, it's curious. I know it took me years, when I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa, I didn't have a clue what he was saying. I understood his words, but not these arcane concepts. I couldn't put together where it was all fitting in. It was very odd to me, And even as I began working for Wisdom, and I was editing, actually, the books I began to work with when I was working for Wisdom was Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. That was back in the late 70s. Even then, I edited this ridiculous book, this vast tome, and I still didn't comprehend this idea because it's such an arcane presentation. I mean, it's 14th century Tibet, for goodness sake. And that was 20th century, but they stick to the lineage very purely. So, even when I first heard Lama Zopa, basically, he was speaking in the same way he would have spoken in the 14th century. And that's, in a way, that's the good thing about it, because it hasn't lost. But the difficult one is we find it hard to process it. You have to learn to kind of listen to this language and then bring it into our own language. And that's where, for example, Lama Yeshe was utterly amazing. At the same time, hearing Lama Zopa completely confused. And then at my first intensive course, along Lama Yeshe would come in the evenings, and suddenly he talked like an ordinary 20th century Western person. It was like he was born a hippie. He just knew how to talk to us, So he made it very real for us. And that was, for me, very compelling. So anyway, here we are. So I've called it, how to loosen the grip of ego grasping by realizing dependent arising. This is a long title. You'll see it in your course notes. How to loosen the grip of ego grasping by realizing dependent arising. The king of logics to prove emptiness. That's the title of this course, all right? And everything, the entire Lam Rim, which I'm going to be presenting, as we know, it's divided into these 3 sections, these 3 levels. And as we know, politely, Lama Zopa politely, respecting the lineage, would refer to the first level as the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. That's a big mouthful. You know what? Colloquially, I'd rather call it junior school. And I find it very interesting. As soon as you say that, we get it. We get it immediately. That's the language we understand. Then you've got the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. Guess what? High school. Then you've got university, which is a great capability. And then you've got Tantra, which is, why not call it postgraduate? It really fits, and we understand those concepts. We know it refers to levels. There's no question. So what we're going to discuss the essence of each of those scopes of, sometimes they're referred to as the low scope, the middle scope, the great scope, the scope of the capacity of the disciple, So the essence of, the essence of junior school approach, the essence is abiding by the laws of karma. So the overt reason, and then, no, sorry, then the essence of the next level, the middle scope, the essence of high school is understanding, is getting to the root of suffering and its causes and learning to understand the delusions, in particular, understanding attachment. So the essence, so these two together, this is when you've got these two, these first and second scopes, this is what you get from this is what they call renunciation of suffering and its causes. Another way to put this, I use it repeatedly, but I find it so helpful. There's this marvelous analogy that a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. Well, this is the wisdom wing. Now, if you graduated there at the middle scope, if you graduated at high school, you'd be a Theravada practitioner. You would eventually include in your practice getting shamatha, the single point of concentration. You'd then start to think about emptiness, and you'd eventually realize emptiness. And in one life or other, you would perfect that realization, and you would achieve your own nirvana, your own cessation of suffering and its causes. And then when you die at the end of that life, you won't come back. You're done. You're finished. You're cooked. You're out of here. You've achieved your own liberation. You achieved the achievement of the cessation of suffering and its causes. And so the Lam Rim, the first two scopes, is that. And you'd graduate at high school, basically. You'd graduate at the middle scope, speaking kind of colloquially, Now, the point of this two levels of practice, these are really intensive, are really containing the nuts and bolts of Buddha's vast body of knowledge. Not all of it, of course, more is coming. But this is the essence of the first level of practice, which is all about how to learn to discipline your body, your speech, and your mind. Why? Because what you think and you do and you say produces the person you become, which is the essence of the teachings about karma. So we first, the first teaching, the essence of the junior school, there's many teachings that lead up to it. As we know, if you study the Lam Rim, you first learn about impermanence, and death, and then you learn about the suffering of the lower realms, and then you take refuge, and then the junior school or the lower scope culminates in the practice of karma. Well, the essence, the actual practice, the essence, the summary of that level of practice is abiding by the laws of karma. And the overt practice there, the explicit teaching of the Buddhas there, the way Tsongkhapa presents it based on Atisha's texts in the 11th century or whatever it was, the explicit teaching is, as I said, to discipline your body, your speech, just at the first level, just your body and speech. You learn about karma. Now, explicitly, why would you learn about, what's the explicit teaching there? Is that based upon not wanting the grossest level of suffering. Okay, there's another approach here. If we look at the Four Noble Truths, which we can really go into, you would go into in more detail in the middle scope. But if we take the Four Noble Truths here as our package, the first of these is that there is suffering. The second is that there are causes. The third is that there is a state of being free of suffering. You can get rid of suffering and its causes. And the fourth one is how to do it. So at the first level, in the first one, there is suffering. Buddha, one presentation is there are three levels of suffering. So the suffering of suffering is the first one. The suffering of change is the second one. The all pervasive suffering is the third one. So again, this has a relationship with the presentation in the Lam Rim. So the practices at the very first level of practice, junior school, lower scope, abide by the laws of karma, that's a solution to stopping the first kind of suffering. So what does that mean? The first kind of suffering is that when the bad things happen, speaking very simply, we all know we don't want the bad things happening. So of course, Buddha talks about it in a more broad view as well, in terms of different realms of existence. But even forgetting about that one, we also experience the suffering of suffering in this daily life. And we know we don't like the bad things happening. It's very clear. We don't like being sick or being abused or harmed or being poor or the bank not giving us a loan or being thrown out by your ex-husband. We know that means suffering. It's pretty clear. Now, that's all we think of as suffering. So the Buddha's first level of practice, the essence, the explicit teaching here, the explicit teaching is, okay, then you want to get, do you like being harmed? Not to mention being born in the lower realms. Do you like being bad-mouthed? Do you like bad things happening? No. Well, here's my solution. Stop causing it, honey. And what causes it? This is where Buddha's first fundamental teaching, and it's discussed in great depth in all the teachings. This is the explicit teaching here. Well, then stop causing suffering. So you go to your doctor and she looks at you, she checks you out. Well, do you want diabetes, Robina? No, thank you. Well, honey, I'll give you the solution. Stop causing it. Oh, what's the cause, doctor? Eating, it's more than that, eating sugar, let's say. So then, of course, you don't want to have diabetes, so you've got to stop wanting to cause it. So here, the same. The essence of karma, the explicit teaching about karma at this level is stop harming sentient beings, because guess what? That's what causes you future suffering. Now, that's pretty abstract for us. I mean, most of us don't even think about future lives for a start. It's very abstract to think that I'm the cause of my own suffering, not to mention the cause of my own happiness, which is pretty optimistic. It's lovely. So this is the very first level of teaching. The explicit teaching is at this first level, back off, don't kill, don't jump on the wrong partner, don't take the ungiven. 3 things of the body, 4 of the speech. Don't lie, don't badmouth behind backs, don't use abusive language, and don't rabbit on about nothing. 7 little things. And 3 at the end are the beginnings of working on our mind. These are the general list of 10 don'ts of the Buddha. Like it's the first entry level into the Buddha's teachings. And this would underpin your practice as you continue throughout your practice, as you get more advanced. But then as we progress more deeply in the first scope, we learn more about karma. And all of it is to learn to understand this natural law that runs the universe, the law of cause and effect. So, but as I'm pointing out here, the explicit teaching is this is the method to stop your future suffering. So you've got to develop this intense renunciation. And this is quite hard for our culture, because we think, oh, that sounds selfish. You mean I should stop harming others because I don't want suffering? We think we feel embarrassed about that. But compassion is too advanced. That comes in university level. We're only in junior school here. We've got to realize that we are sick of suffering. And even though it seems like simple, it's junior school, it's quite hard for us to get this one. It's hard for us to think about karma. One of the main reasons is because we're very used to thinking in religious terms. We're very used to thinking in terms of a creator. So therefore, we're very used to thinking that, God says, don't do this, otherwise you'll get punished. And that is what a sin by definition is, according to the Christian teachings, and probably the Muslim as well. They posit a boss, and a sin by definition, I always quote this, my Jesuit priest friend told me this, a sin by definition is doing what God said not to do. So that's the view that's very deep in our bones, this view of punishment and reward. So we all get guilty and neurotic, we get very heavy with ourselves. We think of karma as like a big stick. But it's not like that. Not for the Buddha. He's not a punisher. He's not a rewarder. He's not a creator. So it's really, we need to think about it carefully. Now, as I'm saying, this is the explicit teaching. Now, what am I keep saying explicit, implying implicit. So the implicit teaching, and this is where we start to understand as we progress, we start to realize that already by thinking about the law of cause and effect, it's beginning to loosen the grip of ego grasping, because the law of cause and effect is the first of the 3 levels of dependent arising that Buddha presents as arguments for how things exist and how to realize ultimately emptiness, which is we get there when we get to university level. So that's not the obvious teaching for us, but it's an excellent teaching. So let's look at that, I mean, we need the details of this law. For the Buddha, this is the law that runs the universe. This is the law that runs the universe. You could argue this is the law within which the universe runs. But we're so used to punishment and reward. We're so used to somebody running the show, the concept of a creator, There's no view like that in Buddhism. It's quite a shocking idea, actually, as His Holiness calls it. It's self-creation, the law of cause and effect. Each individual being, every being, and there are trillions of sentient beings as far as the Buddha is concerned. 7 billion humans is just a tiny percentage of all the beings in all the universes that he would say exist. There are trillions of sentient beings. Mind possessor is the term, translation of the Tibetan term. I find that far nicer than sentient being. A mind possessor, sem chen, so delicious, so direct. There are trillions of mind possessors. And as we know, Buddha divides them all into these different levels of existence, different levels of types of rebirth, trillions of them. As I said, humans are a tiny percentage. So, of course, this is pretty abstract to us. We can see some like mosquitoes and kangaroos, but to think that that's what Buddha is referring to here when he goes into more detail about the law of cause and effect in terms of suffering, that there are different realms of existence that would be the result of negative actions that are the result of which is called suffering, and that we as a human could turn into a kangaroo or a mosquito. I mean, we laugh at that because we so concretize the concept of a kangaroo and a human. But this is, this is the Buddha's view, radically different from the materialist view, which tracks us back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and back to the monkeys. And I don't know whether we found the missing link yet. I mean, that's how that, I used to think about. I haven't studied science, but we see ourselves as intrinsically, inherently human, coming from a previous human who came from a previous human, etc., etc. So, which is not an argument, but that's just the external, though, not the internal. So Buddha's view is we've got these trillions of sentient beings, and that this natural law is a crucial term, as opposed to God's law. I mean, even though we might not be Christians or Muslims, we still instinctively have that view of some kind of law that's run by somebody, And the Buddha, don't blame your Christian mummy or your Jewish mummy for that kind of view, or the kind of being guilty as a result of it. The Buddha would say that view philosophically is a dualistic view, and he would argue with that. That's where he diverged from the Hindus. He diverged from these amazing genius Indians before him, in relation to this particular view about there being a first cause. I mean, there's extensive discussion in the teachings, in the Christian teaching, for example, how there can be a first cause. So let's look at this concept, because this helps us understand dependent arising. So dependent arising, we're going to get there when we get to the university level, and we'll discuss that finally. We'll come to this on Sunday. Dependent arising is the king of logics, Lama Yeshe says, to prove emptiness. Tsongkhapa has written this marvelous verses of praise of the Buddha because of his incredible teachings on dependent arising, So there's many logical arguments we need to use to break down ego's misconceptions about how things exist ultimately. And dependent arising is the king of logics, as Lama Yeshe puts it. There's many logical arguments we need to use because we're so entrenched in these mistaken views about how things exist. So the Buddha, he went as far as he could go in this amazing Indian systems at the time, these really sophisticated meditators, yogis, scholars, unbelievable thinkers. There's extensive literature. And he diverged in his own direction in relation to many points, but specifically, in particular, in relation to the ultimate way that things exist. So in ordinary daily life, this sounds pretty abstract to us. We think, well, why would I need to learn about the ultimate way that things exist? Isn't that the job of the scientists? Isn't that the job of the philosophers? Well, yeah, but Buddha says we all have to be a scientist. We all have to be a philosopher, because we all are suffering. And by realizing the ultimate way that things exist is the method to finally quit suffering. So you want to quit suffering, honey? You better be your own scientist, your own philosopher, your own psychologist. Not just leave it to these other people. Not enough. You've got to do it yourself. So this is where he diverged from those Indian views before. So indeed, if he were arguing, if at the time, they posited, the view that they posit is this kind of permanent, uncaused energy. I think they call it God, I'm not sure. That's the source of everything else, even though they have the view of karma as well. But there's still this energy, there's something that's similar to the concept in Christianity of God, a first cause, permanent, unchanging, uncaused. And the same philosophy refers to this intrinsic part of ourself that they would refer to as a self or an Atman. The Christians would call it a soul. The Muslims probably too, I don't know. Some people call it a spirit. The Greeks call it an essence. It's the same thing. It's this, they're positing something that's intrinsic. And this is one of the views that Buddha argues with. He diverges in his own direction, and he's got these three levels of dependent arising that specifically argue with these views. And I'll be fairly casual with them. So this first one is this cause and effect is the first level, is an example. Cause and effect in general is an example of karma. The law of karma is an example, an excellent example of the first level of dependent arising, which is that everything that's impermanent comes into existence and then goes out of existence. It's the product of the law of cause and effect. Therefore, there cannot be such a thing that didn't have a cause. So even just this is a simple concept we have to sort of think about. And this implicitly is helping us begin to understand emptiness, because it's the first example of dependent arising. It's very delicious. So, if we think about how we feel about I, me, if we, the general feeling, as Lama Yeshe would refer to ego in the loose way we use the word ego, referring to this unhappy sense of me, he calls it the self-pity me, which sounds very cruel, doesn't it? Because when we think of ego, we think of somebody big and strong and powerful and bossing everybody around. No, that's just one aspect. But the other aspect, if you're a little mousy, unhappy person, always depressed, that's also because of ego. Same thing, using this word very loosely. So, so if you think about how we feel when things go wrong, think about it. Look at these cliches we use. I mean, the deepest feeling of ego is, I'm innocent victim. I'm an innocent victim, and you want to get off the hook, to do everything in your power to get off the hook. So I didn't ask to get born, did I? We say that like a joke. That's a really profound statement. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. We say this. This is so huge. If we unpack this, we could do it for the next hour quite easily. Look at that. And that's something that we believe as a truth. Even as we analyze that supposedly joking statement, that's how we feel when something goes wrong. And that really is how we feel. I mean, and actually, fascinatingly, if we take the materialist philosophical view of the universe, it is exactly that. Now, with respect to Christianity, it is also exactly that. I don't want to blame God. That's very naughty. But, the other view, I mean, each of those views, and these are the big prevailing views, or the Muslim view, the Arab religions, where the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims all have a similar view that there's a boss up there who is the boss and who made the universe and made me and made the laws and is the punisher and the rewarder. Variations of that view, speaking very simply. So Buddha argues with that. And exactly the same way he would say we're not a product of a creator, and nor are we the product of mummy and daddy. Sure, they gave us a body, no problem. And that's why we have to posit this thing called a mind, which is not physical, which we'll get into. So the feeling in either one of those, so let's forget the Christian one and the Muslim one, let's look at the materialist one. I mean, it's quite literally true that we would say we, meaning modern science, haven't yet found the reason why things happen yet. We've still got lots of unanswered questions. That's marvelous, nothing wrong. But for sure, the actual view, I mean, I'm not even being sarcastic here, so think this through logically. If you really are the product of your mummy and daddy, they literally create you, not just give you a body, but give you anger and love and kindness and generosity and psychosis and being good at football, being good at music, all your tendencies, your personality. In other words, your mind. If they really did actually make you, then you are correct in saying, I did not ask to get born. It is not my fault. I would absolutely agree. That's a logical deduction. That is logic. I would agree. But somehow we've got to go to our therapist and then she has to argue with us and tell us stop blaming our mother. I don't know why she says stop blaming our mother. Who else do you blame? It's like Frankenstein and the monster. You cannot blame the monster. Frankenstein made that monster. So Frankenstein is in charge. I mean, for me, that is just real logic. So you're right to feel like an innocent victim. Your mother, makes you, gives you psychosis and craziness and then chucks you out. And then your therapist and everybody tells you got to put yourself together. I don't know why. Like Mr. Toyota makes a car, the car goes wrong, and Mr. Toyota throws his hands in the air. Well, it's not my fault. You got to blame the car, and the poor car's got to fix itself. I know it's a dumb example, but I find it's very logical. It's extremely logical. Okay, I don't want to go there with Christianity. I mean, it seems to me logical you've got to blame God too. The Italians do, apparently. They have the terrible words for God when things go wrong. One Argentinian fellow told me that we're even worse than the Italians, he said. Anyway, the innocent victim one is and no one teaches us to feel like an innocent victim, right? Automatically, look how you feel when you get blamed. Look how you feel when you did something naughty and you check to see if anybody saw you do it. Just look at our natural instinctive way we respond to when bad things happen. Or you have a look, even, this is the most fascinating one for me, the way we use the word deserve. It's very, very heavy. It's very punitive, Like we say, I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. I don't. So when bad things happen, look at the pain we feel. Look at the suffering. It's unbelievable. Why did you do that to me? We will say, I don't deserve it. It's a very heavy feeling we have. And the pain is unbearable. We all know it intimately. This is how we suffer mentally. We don't know, because we don't know why bad things happen. As we say, we, in brackets, scientists of the modern world, haven't yet found all the answers. Well, Buddha's got his answer. Jesus has got his answer. The Muslims, they've got their answer. Like when these two women, these two parents, mummy and daddy, their daughter was drowned in one of those crashes a few years ago with Air Asia, I think in Malaysia, and it was mostly Muslims who died. And their daughter died in the air crash. And they were asked in the news, how do you feel about the death of your daughter? We are peaceful. She belongs to God. He has taken her back. Now, I find that totally mind-bogglingly amazing. I would never criticize. I mean, one of the common things materialists do is really be cynical about people who believe in God. If you've got total faith in a creator, and what's a creator? A creator is a being who is perfect, who knows everything, omniscient, omnipotent, all-powerful, has his own reasons, has created the universe. He's allowed to. He's the boss. He's got his plan. He has a plan for you for 1,000 years. Who knows? So then if you have total faith in a person like that, you will be content like those parents. I find that incredible. I find that profound. I would never criticize that because at least somebody's got a plan, isn't it? And God's allowed to keep his plan in his pocket. He's the boss. But if you'd have faith in God, you'll be relaxed. That's incredible. I find that so sublime. I can't believe it. But it happens to not be Buddha's view. That's all. Buddha is not a boss. He is not a creator. He did not create the universe. And guess what, folks? We don't need creating because he says our mind is beginningless. And this is getting cause and effect now. We're discussing the whole concept of cause and effect in Buddhism, which helps us understand ego grasping, which loosens the grip, which helps us understand emptiness, which helps us understand dependent arising. Okay, so the feeling we have, and this is the function of ego grasping. Okay, now in high school, we're going to get there. We'll start tomorrow. In high school, in the middle scope, we start to get, in this first level, we're dealing mainly with controlling our body and controlling our speech, harnessing our body and speech. Because why? Because everything we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind that produces the person we become. So in the next level, in middle scope, we get to the mind. We'll start going to go into detail there. So when we get into detail there, we're going to learn about the various states of mind. Buddha talks about negative, positive, and neutral states. So that he's got 3 categories. There's no 4th category. And all the millions of thoughts and feelings and emotions fit into those 3 categories. It's very rigorous. It's very clear. And this comes from these genius Indians before him. Buddha didn't invent this view. He runs with it. He's got his own interpretation. So here we learn about the negative ones. And Buddha will talk about 84,000 neurotic states of mind. 84,000, can you imagine? But luckily, he narrows them all down to 3. The 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions, ignorance, attachment, aversion. We'll discuss these tomorrow. So ignorance is the root delusion, the root neurosis, root implying such that when it is uprooted, and that's when you realize emptiness, dependent arising in university, that's when you've cut your suffering. That's the main cause of suffering. So this ignorance, this fear, this sense I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, blame, the suffering, punishment, reward, all this philosophical view deep in our bones is not, don't blame your Christian mummy, your Jewish mummy. That's the function. They are the function of this ego grasping, the colloquial term we can use for this ignorance, this instinctive, primordial, wrong view about this solid, concrete, real, separate, lonely, bereft, miserable me. That's the root of the problem. And there's not fair, didn't ask to get born, not my fault, his fault, her fault, their fault. That's a consequence of this deep instinctive view, So this view then of ego grasping, that I'm an innocent victim, I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, why do bad things happen, it is terrible, I don't deserve it. Listen to that's how we suffer. Start unpacking your thoughts and feelings and you're going to see that's the core, that's the way we talk. That's why we suffer, because we've got this philosophical view that believes I didn't ask to get born, that has no idea why bad things happen. But interestingly enough, also we have no idea why good things happen. But I've never yet met a person who agonizes, why do good things happen, Robina? I've never heard that before, because we don't care why. Just give me more, please. And we don't care if we don't deserve them. We just feel like we won the lottery, Thank you. Give me more, please. So we've got to look into this. And this is a very powerful, this concept of deserve and not deserve, this voice of ego, is a very powerful way to look at carefully and unpack this view in order to understand karma, in order to understand dependent arising, that we are in fact in charge. You know, it's just so powerful. It's so delicious, actually, which begins to loosen the grip of poor self-pity me. This is the point about karma, before we even go further, you know. So karma is such a heavy one for us. We can't hear it properly at all. We can't help but hear is Buddha is beating us with a big stick, you know. And if we're good, we might get rewarded, because that view of punishment and reward is very deep in our bones. It's a construct of the ego grasping. It's a consequence of ego grasping, this dualistic view. There's someone out, it's like a conspiracy theory. There's someone out there running the show. No, there's not. We are all individually doing our own trip and creating our own happiness and our own suffering. But the tragedy is we don't realize it. That's why all the bodhisattvas and Buddhas have such compassion for us sentient beings. Forget about being ignorant about emptiness. We are ignorant of cause and effect. We're looking everywhere else but here for why we happen and why we're suffering. This is a tragedy, you know. So karma then is this powerful view that, first of all, like I said, the explicit teaching is because you don't want future suffering, so you stop the causes, you stop the killing, the stealing, the lying, the bad-mouthing. And how do you come, even just, what is the consequence even just for you of this, is you become more stable, more subdued, more in charge of your life. You realize that you would not want to kill, lie, steal, badmouth, and then you can extrapolate and wouldn't want to eat 27 pieces of cake, or, you know, which doesn't, I mean, the main level of negative karma is where you harm others. You start to extrapolate and realize any action that's driven by anger, driven by attachment, can only harm you. You get this incredible sense of self-respect, not a victim. So by even beginning to comprehend karma, even at this gross level, because you're beginning to realize that you are in charge of you. You're not this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. You brought your own stuff with you from the past. You came fully programmed from the first second of conception with your own tendencies, your good ones and your bad ones. That's the principle of karma. So beginning to even own that principle already loosens the grip of ego grasping. Already you're not looking out there for, why did it happen to me? I don't deserve it. You don't say such a thing as, I didn't ask to get born. You don't say that. You don't have that philosophy any longer. It just doesn't come naturally. You've got to train your mind in thinking this, in owning your experiences. As Lama Zopa says, everything that whatever arises in front of us, whatever we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, how things appear to us, is our own karmic appearance. I mean, this is so profound. This is completely emptiness, but there's not explicitly emptiness yet. We're still at the first level. So the more we take on this view, and this is the point, karma, some people are Buddhists around the world, you know, that's okay. Some people right here in Leeds, maybe, who knows, you'll know yourself, have no interest in karma. Oh, I want to be mindful. I want to watch my mind. I want to meditate. I want to practice compassion. But karma, no, I don't need to think about karma. It's and I'm not criticizing. You're allowed to do what you like. You can be a 1% Buddhist. No one's forcing you to do anything. You can be a 1% Buddhist. You're the boss. There's no question. But the more we study Buddhism, if we choose to, we're going to see that you cannot possibly understand the big picture of the Buddha's view of the universe, and indeed that's exactly what it is. It's a view of the universe. It's a world view without understanding karma. It's like Buddhism would fall actually into a heap of nonsense, incoherent nonsense, if we don't posit the concept of karma, because that implies the concept of what the mind is, and that implies no creator. It's the only way that you can fit it, even as an intellectual presentation. So, I mean, we don't have to study all of Buddhism, but, you know, it's interesting to look at how I don't want to think about karma. It's not necessary. No, you can do an awful lot of what Buddha says without thinking about it. It's true. Absolutely, you can. But we're discussing it here. Absolutely. So, okay, again, what is it then? So basically, there are trillions of mind streams, minds, mental continuums, consciousnesses. Mind and consciousness are virtually synonymous. They are, and again, for this to be coherent, this view, we have to posit them as being not physical. Mind is not physical in its nature. It is not a function of the physical. It is not a function of the brain. Doesn't mean the brain doesn't play a role. And this is what's fascinating. I always quote this. What's happened? Kimberly, are you in bed or something? Are you sick, darling? Kimberly, are you in bed? You look like you're in bed. Are you sick?
I'm not sick, but I have a spinal cord injury at C1, so I have to rest my head quite a bit. I hope it's not rude.
No, darling, I wonder, so you're okay. So is it a serious injury?
Yeah, it's pretty bloody serious, actually, to have an injury at C1, it turns out.
Are they going to fix it? Can you fix it? Is it mending?
Yeah, I'm all bolted in. It's all fixed up. The Americans put that up for me. I'm Canadian.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but it left a dent on my spinal cord, so I'm still working on it.
Well, you take care of yourself, girl. Now I understand. Thank you. Good, Kimberly.
Yeah, sorry.
No, don't be sorry, darling. It's
wonderful. This is a helpful talk when bad things happen, right?
There you go, girl. I know it's a tough one, but yeah. Have you heard these teachings before, Karma, or not?
To be totally honest, I've been following your all of your talks on YouTube for the last years.
You've been having it shoved down your throat quite a few times then.
Yeah, and then I stopped eating meat after a bit, and then I got to take my vows. I found a Buddhist teacher up Ireland.
Good.
One for like 1,000 square miles. So.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I don't want to interrupt, but
no, I'm very happy to talk to you. Happy to see you, darling. You take care of you.
I have been wondering why this crap has happened, and I have thought, poor me, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So this
naturally. I mean,
I wake up with it every morning, every day, and I'm still cycling it. It's been
amazing.
Yeah. So this is it.
Very amazing, Kimberly. We'll go into it for sure. Thank you, darling. So I'm happy. Good. You take care of yourself. Thank you. Okay. So now the big picture, the broadest picture possible, is that there are trillions and trillions and trillions of mind streams, mental continuums, consciousnesses, and they're not, as I said, they're not a function of the physical. They're not even physical in their nature. And I'm always quoting this because there's a book of Lama Rinpoche that's come out now. Actually, we're going to be using it for our teachings next week, I think, in Land of Joy. And it's how to face death without fear. And it's the teachings extent. It's like a handbook for Rinpoche of how to help people, in the weeks and months before death, at the time of death, and after death. So, of course, by implication, it's teachings for ourselves, how to prepare for death. And, of course, karma is a huge one there. But what's fascinating, while I was working on that book, I edited it, I read a book by an American medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and it's called The Undead. It's not about zombies. He's a medical journalist. He's a very funny fellow, but actually it's his findings from all the contradictions and problems these days as a result of the business of giving organs, people giving their organs when they die. And so all the difficult things that are coming up now, about, for example, people have reported over the centuries in every culture you can find, people report that people, quote unquote, come back to life. You've been in the coffin, for God's sake, and you wake up again. So you can't explain that in modern science. But more and more of those types of events happening makes it very confusing and really forcing the medical profession, the modern materialist medical profession, to question their assumptions, Many, many other problems. He had a whole chapter on people who have out-of-body experiences, all sorts of things. It's a very fascinating book. But the point I'm getting at here in particular, he quoted one doctor who works in this field as saying, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that at least. So I think it's really excellent that people are questioning their assumptions now, and this business is forcing it. And also because of the Dalai Lama, all his amazing talks the last 30, 40 years, mindandlife.org, this amazing organization in America that's been so many conferences around the world with the best scientists, the best thinkers in the West, discussing with, His Holiness and other thinkers in the Tibetan Buddhist world. And it's only really now that more and more and more books from the great, amazing literature of India, of Buddhist literature, but even implying before that, is now coming into the world, and people are beginning to see these incredible thinkers who've been around for centuries. I mean, we in Europe are so caught up in, with the Christian history, we're so caught up with the Greeks. We go back to the Greeks, and they're our masters. Nothing wrong. We know nothing about India. And now we're beginning to discover incredible number of books are being published by His Holiness, especially. Amazing things are coming. So it's forcing us to question our assumptions. What is a being? What is a consciousness? It's marvelous, So anyway, Buddha's view, and this has been coming from the Indians before him, it is not physical. It is not physical. And this is something you can't prove immediately. How can you see or taste or touch or smell something not physical? You can't. Of course you can't. And we can learn about the mind, which we must do extensively. But as His Holiness says, it's not that easy to actually experience your mind. It's only when you're really advanced. But we've got to start somewhere, which is with the theories. So for the Buddha, it's fundamental that consciousness is not physical, that there are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of consciousnesses, these individual mind stream, which is a good term, mind stream or mental continuum. So think of your mind as like a river of mental moments. Think of yourself, you've got a body and you have a mind. Buddha does not have a third component called a soul, remember? So you've got your mind. First of all, for mind is the word we refer to the grosser level, the conceptuality, all the thoughts, the negative thoughts, the positive thoughts, the emotions, the feelings, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum of our inner being. This is known as our mind, okay? It's a much more broad use of the word, and it's much more subjective. We're not discussing a physical thing that's like the brain that sort of stores all the things in it, you know? It's not like that. It's much more subjectively used, but also it's got extensive literature on exactly what the mind is. And we study that more when we get to the middle scope, to high school. So, okay. So with karma then, then the law that runs these minds, the law that runs gardens is botany. Nobody created botany. There's not a Mr. Botany out there with a big stick kind of making gardens grow. It's the label we've given to the law that clever people have observed by watching how things grow in this universe. That's what we mean by science. Well, that's exactly the Buddhist approach. He has observed the workings of the universe, not just the physical, but the mental as well. That's Buddha's expertise, there's no doubt. And he's seen that the consciousness is not physical. It is not a function of the physical. We've got grosser level of consciousness, and that's the level we function at, conceptuality, which does depend upon a working brain. And we've got, emotional, and that depends upon a working brain. And the sensory consciousness, but that's the tip of the iceberg. But that's all we talk about in our culture. Then what these amazing Indians before the Buddha, and of course the Buddha assert, is we've got these subtler levels of consciousness, these subtler levels of cognition that don't depend upon the brain. And those levels of cognition, we need to access those eventually when we get single point of concentration, shamatha, which we'll talk about later. So this consciousness, also another way to talk about it, like I said, is a mental continuum. So this idea of cause and effect is fundamental. This moment of my cognition, my consciousness, is necessarily coming from the very millisecond before it, a previous moment of consciousness. The main cause of this moment of consciousness, the substantial cause, I think they call it that one, the substantial cause is the previous moment of cognition, like a link in a chain. That link in the chain of that moment of consciousness comes directly from the previous link in that chain, which is the previous moment of cognition. Logically, you could track it back like that. And if you had perfect memory, you could track back your mind, your mental moments in an unbroken chain of mental moments, unbroken between now and you'd get back inexorably, wouldn't you, to the first second of conception. First, when you came out of your mother's womb and there's a little screaming, crying baby indicating there's a mind in there. Well, where did that moment of mind come from? The previous moment when it was in the mummy's womb. And you track back those few months and you're going to get back inexorably to the first second of conception. Now, that's an interesting point. Many people, many women especially, have said that they knew this, not being speaking too bluntly, but, when you're obviously old-fashioned days, when you're in bed with a boy, that second you knew you were pregnant. I had an abortion when I was 23. When I lived in London, I was a hippie in 1968. And I was a good hippie. I had a boyfriend. It's a dumb example. I use dumb. He was Australian and he lived in Earl's Court. I don't know if you knew about Earl's Court back in the early days for Australians. Everyone always lived in Earl's Court. All these hippies came to London. It was such a cliche. And I didn't even like this boy much. I was a good hippie, I was a kind hippie. And I remember that second, oh no, I said to myself, I'm pregnant. So one of my friends, her daughter was in the house with her husband while they were waiting for their house to be built. And the daughter came down for breakfast and said, oh, Mum, I'm pregnant. And then the mother said, oh, great. When did you find out? 40 minutes ago. So many women have said this. So that's really, in a way, that's an example of the Buddhist point. That's when the person begins. The egg and sperm come together, and that's the condition, and the consciousness coming from before leaps into that egg and sperm. And that's the crucial point the Buddha is saying. Egg and sperm don't have consciousness. They're physical matter. They can't have consciousness, but they're the environment in which the consciousness from before jumps in. So that consciousness of yours, which you're tracking back all the way to the first moment of conception, then what about the second before conception? The egg was in mummy's body, the sperm was in daddy's body. Where was your consciousness? It had to come from something previous. And this is the point about the logic of cause and effect. If you posit the law of cause and effect, it seems logical you can't posit a thing that is a first cause, which implies it didn't have a previous cause. And that's what the Christians have great detailed teachings about, and they even use capital F, capital C, first cause, describing how there can be a first cause. Well, Buddha argues with that philosophically. That's not tenable, not viable. If you posit cause and effect, you're positing continuity. I mean, there's extensive teachings by the Buddha about impermanence. And anything that's impermanent, which means changing from moment to moment, necessarily is the product of the law of cause and effect. You can't have it any other way. And if you have cause and effect, as His Holiness said in all his discussions with the scientist, you know, what we do is we're all looking for the first cause, aren't we? You go to your therapist, you're looking for the first cause. When did my anger begin? And we're sort of searching like for a needle in a haystack, going back to what mummy did and what daddy did. Now in science, we go back and back and back. We go back in a linear way, back to the first. Where's the first moment of the universe? Where's the first? And as His Holiness said, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. Because you can't have a first one, because that implies that moment of something didn't have a previous cause. So what in the name of heaven on earth can possibly, how can nothingness produce somethingness? I mean, speaking very colloquially, you know, just even intellectually as a theory, it seems to me is pretty, now if somebody's got another better theory, please argue with me. I'm very happy to hear it. So the Buddha's view is very simple. The universe consists of minds, billions of them, trillions of them, and matter. And matter is made of the four elements. And so matter and minds are both beginningless, necessarily. So of course, we've got to ask ourselves why that's so shocking. Think about that for a second. Why does that shock us? Because deep in our bones, we have a profound belief. Because of ego grasping, we have a deep belief in things being set in stone, unchanged, uncaused, and permanent, unchanging. We have that belief. We don't know we've got that belief. It's deep in our bones. It's one of the functions of the root delusion. So what? Otherwise, we wouldn't be shocked. And even intellectually, even as I say it, that my mind, Robina's little mind, which you can remember 2.5% of, you know, in this day, as we're just grossly limited right now in our capacity for cognition, it just seems like a joke. We laugh to think that your mind even goes back to one lifetime. That's hilarious for us in the modern world. But to think it is literally beginningless, we completely are gobsmacked by that. We can't get our heads around it. But it's not illogical. So it's really important to think about this. To the point here is also that cause and effect, this dynamic process that implies impermanence, is a powerful method to loosen the grip of this view of set in stone, you know, which is the way ego works. And therefore is the first example, a marvelous example of the first level of dependent arising, that things exist in dependence upon previous causes. That's the simple principle. At this level, cause and effect is the obvious, the grossest level of dependent arising. So therefore beginningless. So when Lama Zopa started teaching the Lam Rim to, you know, modern people, which mostly were Western hippies back in the late 60s, early 70s, you know, when you're born in Tibet, you're brought up in this culture where for us in our culture, brain science and, you know, is normal. For them, karma is normal. It's been around in India for several thousand years before that. So it's just an implicit view that they take as a given. So they don't need to learn about this at the beginning. The Lam Rim doesn't discuss the mind, but Lama Zopa always began by teaching beginningless mind, to get our heads around the idea how mind is not the function of a creator, how it doesn't come from mummy, daddy, how it's not physical, and how it's beginningless. We've got to posit this view. Otherwise, the rest of Buddhism collapses into a heap of incoherent nonsense, you know. So karma is the law the Buddha has observed, and the dudes before him observed it. Buddha's got his own take on it. that every, that in particular here, he's thinking mainly about sentient beings, not about the law of cause and effect of couches and shoes and flowers, but it does include the physical universe when we understand karma more deeply. So basically what he's observed is that all the trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of mind possessors, the ones that we can see like humans and the bugs and the giraffes, but there are many other realms of existence that are not visible to us with our gross mind, like spirits, hell beings, and God realms. These are all beings who've got subtler levels of physicality that is therefore why we can't see them or experience. Some people can see, these are all sentient beings, and they're all experiencing different levels of suffering or absence of happiness. There's a whole spectrum. Some are experiencing incredible joy and happiness, and some are experiencing incredible suffering, and some in between. So obviously the big question is, what are the causes of this suffering? What are the causes of this happiness? That's what we say all the time. We are always agonizing. Why is this happening to me? Why is it happening out there, all those poor innocent victims, those children and animals who get abused? That's why we suffer so tremendously, because we don't have an answer. Why is this happening? We go mad. And I think this is the basis of much of our suffering. So to really understand our minds, which we have to do here at this level, and then the next level, when we start to look into the mind itself, we start to unpack these assumptions we have deep in our bones about what we think is true. But they're so deeply ingrained, when we feel, when the boyfriend is mean to you and we have this pain, why did he do this? I don't deserve it. We don't question those assumptions because they're deeply ingrained. They're deeply programmed from countless lives, Buddha says, of all these misconceptions we've got. We're completely programmed in these misconceptions. So we believe in our feelings. We believe in them because they're so deeply ingrained. And this is part of the job of being a Buddhist. The very first one, you start to take theoretically the view of karma, that you create every moment of happiness you have, and you create every moment of suffering you have. You've got to take that at least as a theory, and you attempt to live according to that. And the main way at the first level of practice you abide by that law is at least you stop killing, stop stealing, stop lying, stop cheating on people, stop bad-mouthing. You try to have confidence in that law. It's not very evident to you first, but you've checked on the Buddha, you like the Buddha, you've seen good examples of people who live like this, so it gives you some confidence. But as you progress and get into the high school, the middle scope, and you start to study your mind, and you start to unpack and unravel all these concepts, then you get more confidence, and you start to loosening the grip of this ego grasping, loosening the grip of the self-pity me, being your own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it. To the very first level, we learn, Buddha gives us this little list of 10 don'ts, like I said, the first 3 of the body, the first 4 of the mind. And the basis for his exhorting us not to kill, Jesus says not to kill as well. Why Jesus? Because God said, is Jesus' answer. Very clear. Buddha says the same thing, but you've got to ask Buddha. We just assume it's the same as Jesus, that Buddha says so, and if you're naughty, you'll get punished. No, it's not his job. It's a bizarre idea for the Buddha. This is a natural law. So Buddha is like a doctor who's exhorting us not to kill, because he has found from his own experience that doing an action called killing, which is based on a negative state of mind called attachment or anger or something, that will imprint in your mind the tendency to keep killing, number 1. Number 2, the experience to get killed. And 3, an environmental result of killing. And 4, even a type of rebirth. There are 4 ways in which our actions now will ripen in the future. And if we look into our present, we can analyze break into 4 divisions our entire life, and we can see that these are the fruits of our past actions, virtuous and non-virtuous. So as His Holiness says, karma is like self-creation. So already, like I'm saying, the more we just live according to this law, if we choose, take it as our working hypothesis, attempt to live a good life of morality and not killing, not stealing, not lying, because you know that you create yourself. And therefore, like with eating too much sugar, the doctor doesn't punish you with diabetes. That's a bizarre idea. Your doctor doesn't say, you better not smoke, Robina, because I will punish you with cancer. No. She's a kind person who's has observed the way the world is and has seen that smoking cigarettes can likely cause your lungs to be messed up. So out of her kindness, she exhorts you, stop smoking, Robina. Why, doctor? Because, sweetie pie, it'll cause you sickness. How kind of her. Well, Buddha's the same. Not, I will punish you, but that view is deep in our bones. We see it as punishment. Nobody taught us that. We just assume it is. That's why people hear karma in a very heavy way. We're hearing it wrongly. It's very simple. So when we begin to take this view of karma that implies that I am in charge, I came into this life program with my good tendencies and my bad tendencies. What from? From having done them before. It's like, duh, you know. They're a bunch of habits. Even the life I've got is the fruit of my past actions. How people see me is the fruit of my past actions. The way the environment impacts upon me is the fruit of my past actions. The entire universe is my experience ripening now, and the main cause of these experiences is my past actions. I mean, I think this is the most delicious view. I love being the boss of my own life. I mean, I'm not saying I do it properly. I'm still a victim and moan and complain. But it's a powerful view if we can start to take it on board, you know. It's amazing. So what's happened? My point here is this. What is the consequence of this view is that it loosens the grip of the self-pity. You stop saying, I don't deserve it. You stop saying, you know, it's not my fault. You stop saying, I didn't ask to get born. You stop being a victim. You get less angry, less attached, less jealous, less depressed. I'm not joking. Don't wait for it to come overnight. It takes time. And this is because you're loosening the grip of this concrete sense of an innocent victim me set in stone. You're loosening it, and you're realizing that, yes, it's a fruit of causes. Yes, external world also has part. My mother did harm me, let's say. I mean, she did, but I'm just pretending. My father was kind to me. That person did cheat on me. That man did lie to me. Those things do happen. In our view, they are the main cause of my suffering and my happiness. That's why we think we're innocent victims, because you've never met them before. And that's that. But the karmic view is they still do those things, but now you have a reason for why they did that thing, because karma is super personal, you know. Karma is super personal. It's a law. It's not made up by the Buddha. He's not a creator. He didn't invent it. He doesn't have copyright on it. He, like a scientist, has observed the workings, and he has presented the workings of this law. So ask me some questions now. If you have any kind. Yes, Kimberly. Yes, sweetheart. You be careful. Your C1 or whatever it was called.
Oh yeah, it's fused, so no one needs to worry. I've been attended to.
Good, darling. Anyway, ask your question.
Okay, so I guess everybody knows about my neck issue, but okay, so if karma is really personal,
yes,
then it actually makes me feel worse, because if something really crap happens to you,
yes,
and then of course that affected my whole family. It was really tough on everyone. I ended up being flown to the United States. I mean, it was real high drama, high stakes stuff. And so I'm very grateful to have been spared. I'm still alive, so that's fantastic.
Yes.
Does that mean that I have done something in this life or in a past life, and then it's not supposed to be punishment, but it feels like retribution for like being an axe murderer or having done something really bad?
I understand. Okay, let me ask you some questions, Kimberly. Have you got loving friends?
Yeah, I got a few.
And kind parents?
Yeah, mostly.
And apart from your spine, other things, you got a house where you live?
Yeah, everything else is wonderful.
No, let me just ask you the questions. And you got money in the bank, enough money to live?
Yeah.
And you got good doctors?
Yeah, no.
So if you started to list all the good things in you, I'm not trying to be like Pollyanna, don't misunderstand me. There's lots of good things that happen in your life. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely.
Even since this trauma that's happened, you've got good doctors and good things are happening. So every single one of those is the fruit of unbelievable virtue on your behalf. The fact that you even have an access to $1 is the fruit of your past generosity. The fact that one person is kind to you is because you've been kind to them. So if you add up all the good things, because basically if your life is like a garden, then there are weeds in your garden and there are flowers in your garden. But because we have this, like all of us, Kimberly, and it's so perfect your example, we have this instinctive feeling, and the way you express the question is exactly, it's like we've all read the same book. The words are exactly the same. You mean I did something really terrible in the past, and this is devastating to us. But equally, all the good things are not just accidental either. This is a fruit of unbelievable hard work in virtue and generosity and morality and kindness and goodness and speaking the truth. You can't imagine the good things, but this is what's so ironic. This is what's so fascinating, and I want to talk a bit about this now to unpack it. We have this assumption that bad things shouldn't happen, and we have a deep assumption that good things should happen. So when the good things happen, the fact that you're not sitting here this second, and we're all the same, Kimberly, asking, unbelievable, you mean I must have done good things in the past? This is unbelievable. I can't believe how fortunate I am. We never, ever, 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 ever see it like that. But that's the explanation. But because we have a deep, this is the irony of ego, this way we're talking about ego, which goes in a very deep way in Buddhist psychology. It's an assumption of an innocent victim. So we assume only good things should happen. And then when they do happen, we have this hubris of just taking them for granted. It's sort of like you've got a garden full of acres of cauliflowers and roses and flowers and veggies and greens. And then one or two weeds come and you have a complete panic attack. That's how we all are, sweetheart. Are you hearing my point?
I'm definitely hearing your point. So if you suffer immensely through something, which we all will eventually or have.
Exactly.
I'm not special.
No, that's right.
But does that mean that one of your so-called negative karmic seeds is over?
That's right. Of course it is. Of course it is. That's logical. That's the point. And this is what's so fascinating, Kimberly. It's like if, let's say you go to the gym, you're out of, you haven't got good, you're not in good condition, your muscles, and you go to the gym for 1 hour. So when you come home, how do you feel the first day? How would you feel?
Really sore.
But now you don't have a panic attack and go to the doctor, do you?
No.
Why?
Well, it's a normal part of.
That's right. Better. This is your sickness. That's your sickness is the same. So when you start to practice mentally, they all say that we think things are getting worse. Many people have accidents, they get sick. And that's actually, as Lama Tsongkhapa puts it, mentally or physically, this is because often it can come because the seeds are all there. We're carrying with us, Kimberly, billions of karmic seeds of good and bad. And then if you start to do your gardening right now, you're going to, if I look at, the gym analogy, you come home with pain, with muscles you didn't know you have, but you are glad. So it's not that easy to feel this way now, but it's the same analogy that when you start to practice and you've got strong connection, let's say, with this path and you're practicing, and then the shit happens, it can be actually the sign of an incredibly good thing that you're cleaning out, you're cleaning it up. The seeds are ripening. It sort of sounds like mean to even speak it like that, but this is very much the way it works. Or a friend of mine, for example, years and years and years of serious retreats, you might have heard me mention him before. He didn't have physical suffering, but after years of 3-year retreats, 4-year retreats, you'd think you'd be, like a saint by now. He was having unbelievable mental suffering. I kept going crazy in his mind. He was really freaked out. And he went to Lama Tsongkhapa, and Rinpoche laughed and laughed and laughed. He said, fantastic. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a tough one, but it's logic if we think of the analogy of seeds and fruits. And that's the point about, you said retribution, I think, before. But again, we should analyze these words because that implies a person deciding to punish you. You know, natural laws don't punish you. A natural law is that you don't sort of say cancer is punishing you. Cancer is the consequence of doing dumb things to our body, you know, or whatever it might be. It's no other third person involved who's up there judging, which is the view we have very, very strongly. This dualistic view of a punisher and a rewarder is very deep in our bones. But for the Buddha, that's a misconception. It's a natural law that if you eat too much sugar, you get diabetes. It's a natural law if you put your finger in hot water, it will burn. So it's a natural law. Everything we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind. So and the fact is, honey, we've got countless past lives. You've been animals in a past life. You've been murderers. You've been a rapist. We've been saints. We've been sinners. We've been all kinds. Buddha would say we've got billions of karmic seeds in our mind. So but in a way, how fortunate. I mean, you think of the number of people who have the same suffering as you, and it's not make you feel guilty. This is just logic. Some people have no doctor, no family, no friends, no money, no house, nothing. Think of animals. They don't have the luxury even of a Band-Aid, you know. They live in the nightmare and torture of being eaten alive. So to have sickness within the framework of also having incredible good karma, where you have care and love and attention, it's like a miracle, you know. So it's just a different view, a way of seeing things. When we start to realize this, in other words, the view, Buddha's saying the way we interpret things is the real source of whether we're happy or suffering. So those two Muslim, mummy and daddy, they had a happy mind because they had such faith in God. That subdued their mind. That view worked for their mind. So they remained happy. They weren't tortured and going crazy and wanted to sue the airline. So the same with us. So when you change, and I see that in my life, using the view of karma more and more, it's completely changed my mind. Less angry, less blame, less neurosis, more able to bear suffering when it happens, because you have a way of interpreting it. This is the power, you know, and it's not forcing, but this is trying to just convey the Buddhist approach. And if we're using it sincerely, the consequences it would have for us mentally. Do you understand, Kimberly? A little bit.
Yeah, I guess I would just ask for advice because I still have that conditioning, the dualistic thing, punishment, whatever.
It's very deep in us, sweetheart. It's step by baby step.
So if there's anger and resentment, like it rolls in my head sometimes, because I had a rib injury, so there was a lot of assumption that I was just a nutter, right? But my spinal cord.
So what happened? What was it? Was there an accident? What happened? Just briefly, so I can hear it.
Yeah. So terrible car accident.
Oh, okay.
Chest belt didn't engage, and
what? Sorry, what? Say it again. What?
The safety belt didn't engage.
Okay.
And it stretched the ligaments which hold our heads to our spinal cord.
Yes.
And every time I'd lie down on the MRI machine, everything lined up, so they couldn't see anything. Yes. And so it was just, I had to stay still for about 2.5 years, like.
Right.
And if I moved, it hit my brain stem.
I understand, darling. So when did they finally solve the problem?
I guess I solved the problem, and was lucky enough to meet somebody who knew somebody to look into something.
Amazing.
Anyway, ended up in the United States and met a wonderful doctor who charged me 70% off to.
Amazing.
So beautiful story.
Yes, exactly.
But there's leftover, I hate to admit it, I still have leftover negativity, because I had so many negative interactions.
With whom? What kind of people? Who
staff in my town.
Okay.
Because they couldn't see
what the problem was.
What the problem was. So, so it was like dying in front of all your
people. Darling. I understand that. Yes, I understand. So this is really hard. I know. You see, that's why. That's my whole point. When we can't see why these things happen, that's when we go crazy. So this is why, in the end, Kimberly, no one can force Christianity down our throats. No one can force the materialist view down our throats. No one can force anything. It's up to us to listen if we're interested. Some people will happily accept and not worry about why it all happened. Others, I've always wanted to know why. So for me, I'm using the Buddhist view, and all I can do is explain it. So it's up to you to use this view, but one step at a time, sweetheart. One step at a time. Use it, listen to it, think about it, read it, process it, and slowly, if you like this view and it works for you, you will find the benefit of it. It will bring the benefit. It'll make you more courageous. It'll make you more humble, because then you'll start to have compassion for others. And that's the point about compassion, which we'll get to. The view of karma is the basis of how come you have compassion for others, when most people live in unbearable suffering and have no idea why, and just keep making it worse by being more angry and more insane and more crazy, and then end up harming each other. So, just one step at a time, sweetheart. Take care of yourself. But remember to be so happy that you are fortunate. And they're not just good luck, darling. That is the fruit of your past virtue. So own that, help that nourish you. And then the learning from that is, I must continue to be kind, loving, wise, compassionate. That's the learning. If you see your garden, there are delicious cauliflowers there, but if you take them for granted, just eat up all the cauliflowers and expect more cauliflowers, wondering who's going to put them in your garden, that's schizophrenic. They're your cauliflowers, honey. You grew them. So every time you eat one, delicious, and then grow another one. That's the view. Do you understand, darling?
Yeah, I feel something just coming off of
Good,
me.
I'm so happy. Keep working on it, sweetheart. And meanwhile, totally take care of yourself, and I hope you get completely better. Will you get completely better? What do they say?
Scientifically, not completely better, but I don't necessarily.
No, keep working at it, darling.
Yeah.
Keep working on it. And also, you should, if you like practices, like you should maybe say the medicine Buddha mantra, things like this. Have you learned anything about mantras or anything?
A little bit. I just started with the Guru Rinpoche. Okay,
wonderful, darling. Learn it. You just recite that. And the way they describe in the more sophisticated teachings in the Vajrayana, the more advanced, that we've got this subtle nervous system, and our mind is very linked to these subtle energies, the Tibetan medical system. So by you saying mantra, you're purifying your mind, and that helps purify your body at a subtle level. Don't be surprised you can even heal yourself.
I won't be.
Good, darling. Well done.
Anything is possible.
That's right, Kimberly.
Possible.
So thank you. Thank you so much, darling. So helpful.
I hope you didn't interrupt for everyone.
No, it's not. Everybody's got one story or other that's exactly the same. Don't worry about it.
It's true. Thank you.
Thank you, precious. Thank you so much. Who else then? Anybody else there, Lynn?
Venerable Robina, Adele's put a question in the chat for us.
Good, come on.
About her signal, so may I just read it out to you?
Yeah, please do.
It says, using the school analogy, where we have previously lied, caused another pain, and done bad things, or done things we regret, or where we blame ourselves.
That's right.
At high school, as part of our karma, are we able to graduate, or must we retake all the exams before we can move on?
I don't think it's quite like that. It's not quite as concrete as that. No, it's much more easy than that. The very first level of karma, understanding cause and effect, understanding, impermanence, everything changes moment by moment. From that point of view, there is no karma we can't change. So, there we are working on our body, working on our speech, trying not to lie, to kill, to steal. Then we do something naughty, let's say, and you pop in a negative seed. Well, the sooner you notice you've dropped it in, you can learn to pull it out by going the opposite, by noticing you did it, by regretting. It was called purification. You regret that you did it. You have compassion for the person you harmed. You do a little purification and you vow not to do it again. You can change it. There's no karma that can't be changed. So it's not like absolute, you've lost the lot, start all again. Not like that. That's too extreme. Not like that. So it's very optimistic. It's a purification practice. What else? Have we got 90 minutes or 2 hours, sweetheart? Lynn, 90 minutes or 2 hours? I can't hear you. Unmute. Unmute, Lynn.
Sorry. We got 2 hours teaching.
Good.
But then you said you might take some Q&A at the end.
I know, but always in the middle for me. It's all part of it. So we'll see. Yeah. That's good, darling. Go on. Who else? What else is there? Anybody else got questions? Lynn?
Nothing else in the chat.
I can ask a question.
Who are you? Where I have to see you? Okay, yeah. Paolo, come on, talk to me.
Venerable. Thank you so much for your teachings.
Pleasure, darling.
You mentioned one of the fruits of karma is thinking that we didn't choose to be born.
Yes.
But isn't the teaching that we are born without choice? When we die, we are choicelessly.
No, I mean, no, not like that. Not it's much. It's a sort of a way of putting it, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So let's talk about it, shall we? Shall I describe the process? Okay. So first of all, karma is a natural law. Okay. Karma is a natural law. Means it happens. Whether you like it or not, you have the nature of, I mean, botany is a natural law. You get the certain conditions, certain kind of temperature, certain amount of moisture, certain amount of earth, certain seeds, they all come together and then things will grow. That's just the way it is. It's a natural law. So karma is like that. And it's sentient beings' minds and in relation to the external world. Okay, so most of us are not in charge. We have no idea there's such a law as botany. So we're not in charge of it at all. So in that sense, Paolo, exactly. If you have never heard of botany and you just, you know, there's a thing out there called gardens and you don't even know you can intervene. You don't even know there's a law that governs it. You just have to live in fear of it. And if you're living in the tropics, pity help you. You know, these big plants are going to come in and grow in your house and knock your roof off. So of course you're going to live in incredible fear because you've got no idea what's running this monstrous thing out there. So, I mean, get my point now. So in that sense, of course, you've got no control. You've got no control whatsoever because you've never heard of a law. So you can start to learn the law of karma. You can know why there's suffering and why there's happiness. And you can only know a little bit in the beginning, the theories, you know, but as you progress, you get more advanced and can see it coming and you're much more in control. So even if you spend your life, so okay, even if you have a reasonable garden and you learn the laws, now, this is my point about karma, that you really learn the laws well, and you are so confident. You've got this acre of ground out there, and I've never heard of botany, and you know exactly about your seeds and your fruits and the weather and the different climate. I mean, reasonable botany. You can be, you know, you don't live in fear every day of what might or might not grow because you know botany. You can be confident, you know, and then you can even. And I'll say, what's that piece of ground out there? There's nothing in there. And you'll say, oh, no, I've planted a few seeds, Robina. And you can proceed to give me a pretty good vision of exactly what your garden will look like in 10 years. And I will be amazed. And I'll say, my God, Paolo, you must be clairvoyant. And you'll say, no, Robina, I just know the laws of botany. You get my point here?
Yes.
Architecture, building, numbers, engineering. People build 100-story buildings. No one's having an hysterical fit that every day it might come down. Yes, now other laws can intervene, like, you know, maniac pilots running their aeroplane into the building. But the laws, this is what we call science, Paolo. We have confidence in our laws. That's the view.
Okay, thank you.
And darling.
And I have a quick follow-up.
Okay, good. Go on then, yeah.
So in the 10 non-virtues, sexual relations are still permitted, but for monastics, obviously they're not permitted on the basis that it would cause negative karma.
Okay,
so
okay. So I don't even like using these words permitted, you know. Let's just think about vows, what they mean. Vows and don't do this and don't do that. When you're driving a car, you know, you have to learn so many vows. You have to learn probably 100 things you shouldn't do. Would you agree with that? So, of course, you can say, well, you know, when I'm driving a car, and I've agreed that when I drive a car that I won't put my foot on the accelerator at the same time as the brake. You would say that, you'd learn that and you'd internalize that law. So you wouldn't say, oh, am I permitted to put my foot on the brake at the same time as the accelerator? I don't care whether you're permitted to. It would blow your bloody car up. It'll harm you. That's the logic of these laws here. They're natural laws. They're not somebody bossing. So, okay, we've got to look behind the energy of what are these don'ts. Why is Buddha exhorting us not kill, steal, jump on 14 boys or girls every day, whichever you prefer? Not, you know, it's not punitive. It's because they're driven by delusions. They're driven by attachment and driven by anger. So then because everything we think and do and say leaves seeds in our mind, what kind of person will that produce? It'll produce, you know, a person who becomes a junkie for sex. It'll a person who's uncontrolled in their mind, who will continue to lie, continue to kill. And then because of personal karma with individuals, you'll get killed and get lied to. So it's not a question permitted. Do you want suffering or not, Paolo? Then if not, honey, control your body, control your speech, and control your mind. So yes, so the monastic vows are the same kind of thing. You know, I've vowed not to kill, not to steal, not to lie. I've got a whole bunch. And then one for sure, also one of the vows is usually the distinction between the monastics and the lay is there's no, although these days many lay people don't have sex all the time. It's not as if you have sex all the time. You don't have sexual contact because you want to free yourself from the normal, usually sexual contact, you know, comes along, in most societies, it comes along in a certain package with husbands or wives and children and houses and mortgages and jobs and responsibilities. So the bigger picture is more the lifestyle that you're choosing, you know. So as a monastic, You choose not to have that lifestyle. So you also make a decision to yourself. You vow you won't have sexual contact because you don't want to arouse the attachment. You don't want to go berserk and have to be caught up in all the dramas, because you want to be free to do other things. Just like I would if I had to become like Federer, I would sacrifice many things. I would say, no, I won't do this and I won't do that. And I won't have, go to parties every night, and I won't eat, every 6 meals a day because I want to become a tennis player. So you make your choices about what you want to accomplish, and then you choose not to do certain things for your benefit. It's always for your benefit. You with me, Paolo? Paolo?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm reflecting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good, fine. Any more questions from all that?
Thank you. Do I have questions on that?
Yeah. Well, that's a
Oh.
Go on, keep asking. It's okay.
Well, I can ask one more question, and then I don't want to take everyone's time. I know other
But
questions.
these questions are relevant to everybody. Don't worry about it.
Well, I'm curious on this question. Like Tsongkhapa, Tsongkhapa had far more specific included far more specific precepts on sexual misconduct than the Buddha.
Or did he? I don't know. You must have studied more than I have.
Unlike Oregon. So for example, like same-sex. So for example, Tsongkhapa would say that same-sex relationships would violate the third precept. And
if that's there, that's coming from the Buddha, not Tsongkhapa. He could not have made it up. There's no way in the world. There's no way.
Well, the Buddha didn't prescribe by gender or by organ.
Nor does Tsongkhapa. They don't even discuss. I think the Tibetans don't even talk about so-called homosexual, heterosexual. They're labels we've made up. The behavior is more to do with a certain action, and that would imply putting a penis in anywhere but a vagina. That's
right, and that's not found in the Buddha's discourses. So that's just what I wanted to ask.
It's coming right from the Buddha. Tsongkhapa could not have made it up. There's no way in the universe he could have made it up. Not possible. Absolutely not possible. Tsongkhapa would not have made it up. That's like heresy. This is fundamental ones coming from the Buddha. So the point, anyway, so you're asking about homosexuality basically, aren't you?
Well, I was asking about, I haven't found anything in the Buddhist sutras.
Well, I don't know. That's a total surprise to me. I've never heard that Tsongkhapa. Yeah. I mean, forgive me, I haven't studied that much either, but this is one of the most fundamentals of the Buddha. It's coming right back to the Buddha's precepts. This is what everything I've learned and heard in all the commentaries is coming from the Buddha. It's not possible. It's not possible that Tsongkhapa would make that up. I mean, that's very fascinating, Paolo, and I'll certainly look into it. I'll get the source. I'll ask some of my scholar friends exactly where the source is.
Please, yeah.
Of course. But I mean, in general, that's one of the most fundamental things at the time. So have you heard what Buddha said? What have you heard that Buddha said?
Well, the Buddha said, basically, you don't break your relationship commitment, you don't break someone else's relationship commitment, you don't break a celibacy vow, and you don't have sex with minors. So those were like how the Buddha prescribed.
You've read the Buddha said that.
Well, that's how he describes the third precept in the sutras.
Who describes? Who?
The Buddha.
Where did you, and what's your source for that, please?
I don't know the.
I think you need to, I'll happily find out. So, but you need to email me. Let's discuss it.
Okay, thank you.
It's an important point. Thank you. I mean, I'm not very good with my sources, but I'll find out for you for sure.
But yeah, the question around karma and homosexuality is very interesting to me. Yeah.
Of course. But meanwhile, let's look at it in a broader sense, please. Can we?
Yeah, thank you.
I think we're seeing it through the lenses now of our crazy world where, for example, the Buddha would say, he might have a thing about sexual misconduct. Don't put it in anywhere but let's say anywhere but a vagina. That's how I've understood it. Now, if you're living this is me talking now. If we're living in a world where people rape each other daily, children are raped, but they put a rapist puts his penis in a vagina and not an anus, and you're thinking, oh well, that's not a misconduct. Or a man will abuse his wife every day by raping her 7 times in her vagina, but not her anus. Oh, that must be not a sexual misconduct. It's kind of bizarre to think like that, isn't it? So it's not so much. It's more contextual. So I remember His Holiness says, well, maybe in the Buddhist text it says this and that about certain actions. It's not like labeling a person. You don't define a person in that way, because heterosexual people put their penis in an anus. So it's not a question of labeling a person as a heterosexual or a homosexual, but it's only in our culture because it's so enormous and because there's so much suffering by being labeled in a certain way and being vilified and hanged and, you know, like because you've got black skin or because you put a penis in an anus, you're called this and that. The violence around it all is so intense in our culture, and we label people in this very heavy way, you know. So, but I mean, none of that's the point. You've got to get past all that garbage and get to the fundamental point. And even let's assume that Buddha did say about don't put in a vagina, and we're going to discuss it, thank you, then it's an action he's talking about. And why? Because you know, you're not a monk, you're not a nun, but you're going to have a wife because you've chosen a lay, you know, because he talked to wives and husbands at that point. He wasn't talking to anybody else. He was talking to couples. He's talking to very conventional people who lived in a household with babies and a husband and a wife. That's how he was talking. And that's who he was talking to, you know. So then you take that and then you put it into our culture. We've got this mania and terrorism and rapes and murders. And as His Holiness says, maybe the Buddha says this, but how can I possibly judge two people who live together and who love each other? So there's more, but we're going to really narrow things down exactly what the Buddha is saying and then analyze the logic behind it. And then we all make, I mean, it's like Buddha also said, don't lie. I mean, I'm just trying to give some reference here, trying to give some context, you know. But we talk about homosexual. I don't think they had an equivalent word in Indian back then. We use those labels, and then look, and then the suffering of it now these days is because of the way we're treated by each other and labeled and isolated, and, you know, hanged at the stake and all that kind of, what do you know, hanged at the stake, burnt at the stake, whatever. I'm just talking, Paolo. So anyway, please email me, get my email address, my full name, Robina Courtin @mac.com, like the computer. Listen, we'll discuss and let's find the sources. I should know anyway, and I'm a bit lazy, so let's look at these things. Okay. All right, darling. Thank you, Paolo. Very kind. What else, people?
Hello, Venerabina. It's Lynn again. We've got two more questions. I've got one in the chat from Sarah, and then Eileen has got her hand up. But if I read Sarah's out, she says she's really inspired by your talk, but she's asking if you could say a little about anxiety, because anxiety feels very self-centered. And she says she's trying to develop metta, but the thoughts can be distracting.
Oh, of course they can, darling. I mean, strictly speaking, this doesn't come till next week, but now that you've asked, I don't want you to have to wait 7 days. That'd be mean of me, wouldn't it? So let's just look a little bit at the mind for a second, darling. Okay. So the Buddha's approach to the mind, you know, it's he divides all the countless hundreds and thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions like this big soup in there, which we usually have no control over, right? And he divides all this into 3 categories. There's more to it than this, and we'll go into this next week. He divides it into 3 categories. There are the neurotic, I-based, fear-based, unhappy states of mind. And these are the source of our pain. And you put anxiety in there, and I'll describe in a minute. Then you've got the positive thoughts. And this is my point to Kimberly, you know. I mean, not just so much the thoughts, but the fact that Kimberly can have people kind to her, loving, compassionate, money in the bank, doctors who help her. All of this is from past virtuous thoughts, and then the actions of virtue that she did on the basis of those thoughts, which are now ripening as the good things happening in her life at the moment. And that goes for all of us. So the positive thoughts like love come, so that the negative ones, and negative is heavy for us, but don't worry about it. Don't feel it's like blame or guilt. But you've got anger, attachment, jealousy, anxiety, you know, arrogance, low self-esteem. These are all rooted in fear. So you could really argue anxiety is another word for fear. And it's just the primordial energy of all these unhappy states of mind, in particular attachment, which I'll get into in a second. The second lot are the positive states of mind. They're reasonable, they're valid, they're useful, they make us courageous, they make us strong. Love, kindness, intelligence, generosity, forgiveness. These are the positive thoughts. And the third lot, we won't go into these. They're the mechanics of our mind, like concentration, good memory, these types of things that make us function properly. So, okay, anxiety is a common one for us. So there's, you know, the 3 main neurotic states of mind for the Buddha. Like I said before, he calls them the 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions. The root one is this primordial, deeply instinctive, beyond articulate, deeply instinctive assumption of a separate, concrete, solid, set in stone me. So now it's like a sleeping lion most of the time. But when something goes wrong, it rises up, and its nature is fear. But before that even, so this ego grasping, known colloquially as ego grasping, it gives rise to effectively the main voice of ego throughout our daily lives. And this one is this simple word called attachment. So attachment too is deeply instinctive, deeply ingrained, and it's an assumption that supposed I must get only the nice things every single second, that it must get only what I want. That's attachment, and it's kind of brutal. And this is there all the time, Sarah. So every second of the day where kind of this attachment is hoping to get the right sound, the right smell, the right taste, everything should work perfectly. And the second it doesn't, that gives rise to the third of these three. And the bare bones state of mind for this third one is simply called aversion. But its volatile expression is called anger. The milder levels of it are irritation, upset, annoyed, anxiety, I'd say. And then the subtler level of it is despair and depression. There's like this spectrum. So aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, and that's 1,000 times a day. Now, volatile people like me, when my attachment doesn't get what it wants, I'll shout and yell and kick. Quieter people like you, I'm sure, when the things don't go right, and that's 1,000 times a day, Sarah, we don't even notice most of the time, then your attachment gets upset and it turns into anxiety. So it's like this chewing a dog, like with, this worry and fear of this might happen and that might happen, if only this, and because of that, oh my God, I can't bear this one, and what if this happens, and what if that one? That's just aversion and attachment play kicking into each other. And so the milder level of just plain old anger, angry people are very active, so they get out there and they punch and they bully to get what they want and make things happen. But there's a good quality in that, there's action, but it's got to be based not on anger. But the quieter version of it, which is where you're like that, is kind of anxiety. You sit in it, and you hear it, and it literally develops into panic sometimes. This is attachment and aversion kicking in all the time. This is how we are, and everybody on the planet has this, because we don't understand it. We keep thinking, what went wrong? What's going wrong? What's this? Why? Because we keep looking out there, but it's the mind. It's just how the mind is. So learning to know this model of the mind, learning to identify it every single day, doing little practices every day, doing practice every day, learning to know that there are methods there to help us unpack and unravel this mind of ours and eventually go beyond the suffering, beyond the anxiety, and lessen the attachment and lessen the anxiety and lessen the fears and lessen the depression, and grow the confidence and the self-confidence and the compassion and the love and the kindness and the forgiveness. That's what practice is, sweetheart. So part of the process is, like talking to Kimberly, it's not going to change overnight. We've got to learn to live with these crazy roommates. We've all got millions of crazy roommates in there, but part of our problem is we can't stand them. So it's not even as if the anxiety itself is the problem. Sometimes it's not even as if the anger itself is the problem. It's because when we see the anger, hear the anxiety, we then add more anxiety and more anger to it and add another crazy roommate, and we just keep multiplying the crazy roommates. And then we can't bear listening to them. We wish they'd all go away. And then we heard about something called meditation that makes them all go away. So we have these ridiculous fantasies about meditation. Part of the process is we've got to know there are methods there to learn to control our mind and work with it and grow it. And part of the process is to learn to live with all the crazy roommates. And as soon as you learn to hear them and learn to stop believing their story, sanity comes. Slowly, slowly though, Sarah. What do you think? If you want to say something to me, Sarah. Which Sarah is this? Is it Sarah True saying this? Or another Sarah? Not you. Okay, there's still Sarah. If you have something more to say, darling, you say it, okay? What else is there, Lynn?
Sarah's saying thank you.
Oh, good, Sarah.
And we still have a question from Eileen, if she...
Aline, okay, but slowly, slowly, Sarah, darling, slowly, 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 have confidence. It's a bit the same as Paolo about karma, or Kimberly. If, and then, again, no one could force you to like the Buddhist answers, But if you know there are laws out there that you can learn that can control your garden, even though your garden's still chaotic at the moment, you'll have confidence to persevere. So if you know there's a map of the mind there and methods to help us analyze and work with and unpack and unravel and grow this marvelous mind of ours, then it'll give you confidence to persevere with it. If you know there are methods, like if you're 20 kilos overweight and you've never heard of a gym and you've never heard of nutrition, you'll be right to be depressed. But suddenly you hear there are methods, straight away you get perky and confident. You're still 20 kilos overweight, but you know there's a method. That's the point. So it's up to you to decide if you think the Buddhist methods are the ones that'll work with you. You've got to learn, so when it gives you confidence that there are methods there, and then you've got to start one step at a time. It's not magic overnight. Nothing is magic overnight, but you get confidence that you feel there are methods there that you can use. That right there gives us confidence, Go on, Aline's point, what is it?
Hello, Robina.
Hello, sweetheart.
I'm going to circle back with Paulo because he's talking, I had the same question about misconduct, sexual misconduct. Okay. And I think what he's talking about comes from the steps of the path of enlightenment. It's a commentary on Tsongkhapa. And then specifically, actually it says...
What, darling? So you should send the reference to me. That's very helpful. But go on, read it out.
I can send this to you. So specifically, when it comes to the karma, varieties karma and sexual misconduct, it says here that, yes?
I want to know what the instruction is, not what the results are. What's the instruction?
It says that the second type of improper sexual object is from the man's point of view, men. This refers...
Stop for a moment, please. Who is the author of this book? Look on the cover, please.
It's Geshe Lundrup.
Precisely. It's Geshe Lundrup giving commentary on Saka.
On Tsongkhapa, yeah.
And he's a 20th century Lama, Paolo. He's spelling it out. That's Geshe Sopa, not Tsongkhapa. But because he's interpreting Tsongkhapa. But anyway, okay, good. So just send me the reference to it, please. That's helpful. But I'm sure Paolo knows that. So thank you.
Because it says here exactly that it says that the improper parts of the body, and it lists the mouth, the anus, the frontal rare orifices.
Yeah, but my main point is coming from the Buddha, whereas Paolo doesn't think it does. So that's what we're going to have to look into. Thank you very much.
But we will discuss about this later on during this weekend, because my question is exactly about that. What happens to homosexuality?
What's your question?
What's your question,
Aline?
I am getting there, Robina. I'm saying that the question is, it says you cannot have sex with improper parts of the body, and it lists the anus, for example. That would rule out gay sex.
No, excuse me, don't have to interpret. Just what's your question, darling? I don't need to be told. That's all right, Eileen, forgive me for shouting. Just tell me your question, baby. Tell me your question.
The question is, does that mean that we have to rule out gay male sex?
Okay, Aline, your doctor said to you that something, if you eat a certain food, will bring a certain suffering. How do you work with that advice? What do you do with it, Aline? What do you do with that advice if you trust that doctor? How would you approach that advice? What would you do? How would you approach it?
I'll try my best to stick to it.
Why would you?
Because I don't want to suffer. I don't want to be sick or get worse.
That means you have to trust your doctor.
Then what, sorry?
It means you have to trust your doctor's advice.
Exactly.
Okay, well, it's up to you to decide who you trust. That's my answer to you.
Okay.
No one gives you permission to do anything. You're the boss. Yeah. The way you ask it is the typical way we all ask, you mean I'm not allowed to do this? It's like a child. It's up to you to decide. You're in charge of your life, Aline, is my way of answering you very bluntly. Tsongkhapa might be interpreting Buddha. He might be making it up, as Paolo is suggesting. So you've got to look into the meaning of it and understand the logic of it. If it says that, you've got to decide. I'm not going to spoon feed you. I'm not going to say I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm not going to say I agree. I'm not going to say anything. I'm simply saying this is a book. It's a cookbook with advice in it. It's up to us to decide what to do with the advice. It's up to us to decide. So you're the boss. Back to you, Elaine.
All right, that was it. I think that's, to me, that solves the problem, because I haven't even thought for me, you brought an excellent point, which I never thought that this is a commentary on Tsongkhapa's. Exactly, but it's just one of those points that is so obvious that I never gave critical thought thinking about it. So when you tell me to decide who to trust and how to follow, that solves my question for me, at least.
But
how to deal.
But that is the main point, isn't it? Whether it's your doctor,
Yes.
whether it's a cookbook, whether it's advice about driving a car, advice about anything. But our trouble, I'm not saying you should do it. I'm not saying you should do it. But any piece of advice that's there, and you know, and like everything, you can't do everything the doctor says. Maybe you can't do everything the doctor says. But we've got to think about these things and then make decisions. It's our life. We have to use a guideline. We have to decide. That's what I'm saying.
That was it. I'll send you this.
Thanks, Arlene. Very kind.
Thank you.
What else, people? What else, people? Any questions? More questions?
I have a question, Robina, if I can.
Good, Louise. Good, sweetheart. Yes.
Yeah. Just thinking about whatever arises is our own karmic appearance.
That's a Lama Zopa's way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah. Does this mean then, because obviously each of us has our own kind of karma that's come into this life, that whatever we see, whatever we experience, even with multiple people sharing an experience, that we're actually all seeing something different? We're all...
I think it's, and that way that's proving emptiness already. I mean, that's really clear. You know, as our parents, our mummy would tell us, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Absolutely, this is the Buddha's view. So we've got some karma that is collective. They call it collective karma. So, you know, where you're living, let's say where you live, you know, the group of people who've got similar karma, born in a similar place with a similar type of environment, similar type of weather. You'll have variations of how you respond to it. Some will be more dramatic than others, but in general, there's a collective karma there that you've done similar actions to have that kind of experience, you know. But absolutely, when you start pinning down every individual's response to that environment, everyone will be slightly different. So absolutely, of course, it's exactly, this is the Buddha's entire point, that, you know, there's no external, we finally come down to it. We're all going to experience this. Each of us will experience the same thing in 6 different ways, all depending on our karma. Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is probably where a lot of conflict comes, because I think, I know from my own side, yes. I think I've just lived under the assumption everybody sees things exactly the same way I do.
No, of course, and that's where we get into trouble, isn't it?
It's kind of how you get conflict.
No, I know, exactly. I know, it's so true, isn't it? It's sort of obvious in a way. You know, all interpret things differently because we've all got our different states of mind. Some of us have more attachment, some have more anger, some have more jealousy, you know, some have more patience. I mean, it's so clear, isn't it?
Okay.
Good. Thanks, Louise. What else, sweethearts? Any more, Lynn? Nothing more? All right.
No, there's no more questions in the chat, and nobody else has their hand up. So
okay, so let's continue a little bit more then, just to summarize for our last 10 minutes then. The broader point I'm trying to make in these 3 days is this relationship between the different stages of practice and how they all lead us to this more subtle understanding, which is the final understanding we have to get to develop the wisdom that sees everything as having no intrinsic nature, and that how these teachings are leading us to understand dependent arising, and especially this first one, karma, is this, you know, is a law of cause and effect, which is a marvelous example of the first level of how nothing has an intrinsic nature, that everything, you know, is the product of different factors. Dependent arising is that everything exists in dependence upon various factors, and the factors here are causes. Everything exists in dependence upon causes. So the learning from here, the explicit, like I said, the explicit learning about karma is that every millisecond of what we think and do and say will sow seeds in our mind that will produce future results. And so when you start to go into more detail, which I haven't done, let's just do it briefly now, that every single thing we think and do and say with our body and speech are driven by what's in our mind. And so when, for example, you can use one example of, say, non-killing, one action called non-killing. So for that to be a complete action, there have to be 4 things in place. And a complete action is one that leaves a seed in the mind that will ripen, in this case of non-killing, will ripen as, say, for example, a type of good rebirth, such as a human birth. So there's 4 factors involved, and the crucial one is the mind involved. The first one, there has to be an object. So let's say there's a mouse in your kitchen. The next one is the mind involved in doing the action. And this is where not just do we, like, that point, Louise's point, not just do we experience what's out there differently, but every action we do, everybody brings something in their mind that's slightly different to do what looks like the same action. So you could have the action of not killing a mouse. So one person's, the next one is your mind involved in it. So one person's motivation might be very strong compassion. Another person might be, they don't like the idea of, hurting a mouse because it leaves a mess, and they're more attached to having a nice clean house. So they'll kind of shoo the mouse out rather than get rid of it. So, I mean, your motivation is huge. There's a vast spectrum of motivation there. And that includes every action we do. You can talk about an action itself, like we were discussing earlier about sexual misconduct or killing or stealing or a virtuous action. You can discuss an action in itself, but then the way you do the action, the motivation for the action, what's in your mind the time you do the action, that's the main factor that colors the action and determines whether it's negative or positive. You can still talk about actions in their nature. You can even do a negative action with a positive motivation. When you're on the bodhisattva path, that would be a virtuous action, in fact, because your motivation is so compassionate and that you're happy to do even what looks like a negative action because it's for the sake of sentient beings, including sexual misconduct, suppose it, So the very first level in the laws of karma, it's very down to, it's like learning what kind of seed will bring what kind of fruit. It's very simple. It's very clear. It's very logical. It's very straightforward. This and this will bring that result. That is this and this is this. But as you progress spiritually and you change your mind becomes more vast. You can even at some point, as I said, on the bodhisattva path, do an action that we call negative, like killing, and it can actually be a positive action because it's motivated by strong wisdom and very powerful compassion. But you've got to start, like basic botany, you start with what is a good seed and what is a bad seed. What will bring a weed and what will bring a flower. But we all know, as you learn the laws of botany in a more sophisticated way, you can really play with things. You can be much more skillful, much more advanced in your approach. But you've got to start at the most basic levels. And so again, like the actions that Buddha would suggest here, no killing, no stealing, no lying, no sexual misconduct. Usually when you take refuge, also these days, I know that it doesn't even get mentioned. When you take refuge, I mean, I've been given permission to give refuge by Lama Zopa, for example. And so when I give the non-sexual misconduct vow, it's given only as don't cheat on your partner. When His Holiness gives it, he only gives it as no raping. He doesn't mention organs. He doesn't mention orifices. He doesn't mention penises and vaginas. He doesn't mention any of that because the world is so very different now. So, and I remember, so then the way I give it, because I've been taught that way, is simply to not cheat on your partner. It's not given any other way. So of course, if you become a monk or a nun, there's no sex period, so that's not even an issue. So that things, it's not saying that there might be something in the Buddhist text, and Tsongkhapa might say certain things, and Geshe Sopa gives a commentary on Tsongkhapa on the Buddha, and they list it exactly. But these days, it seems to me, and I'm just speaking very loosely here, that somehow because the world is such a crazy place, the Dalai Lama, he just says, don't rape. He doesn't say anything else. He says, don't rape, With killing, he doesn't even say, don't kill creatures. When he gives refuge and lay vows now, the typical vow is you don't kill humans, you don't kill any other beings, but he only gives it as not murdering a human being, because most Western people can't even think of not killing a mosquito. So it's not as if he's changing Buddha's rules. He's loosening it a little bit because it's beneficial for people to become Buddhists, beneficial to become homosexual, so-called, these labels. I hate these labels. It's beneficial for people who like Buddhism. And there's so many people who are homosexual, who live in homosexual relationships or Buddhist, and they're not breaking their vows or commitments. Because if you've taken the vow for His Holiness, he just says, don't rape. That's all. If you've taken the vow from me, if you take refuge, it just says, don't cheat on your partner. So things are contextual as well. It's not changing. I mean, I don't have the power to change that vow. I didn't change it. This is according to Lama Zopa, so I give it the way Lama Zopa gives it, Don't cheat on your partner. That's it, Because the world, it seems to me, this is my own commentary here, the world is so berserk, so outrageous, so violent, so much suffering, so much raping, so much torture. I mean, it's almost like a joke, I mean, it just goes without saying the violence is so shocking. So as His Holiness says, So it's up to any one of us to look into the text in detail and go into absolute strict detail to see what's there. Of course it is. But remember, there's no punishment, there's no reward. No one's doing it to us. We do it to ourselves. So we want to understand the doctor. We might not know why the doctor says, don't eat that food. You either trust the doctor and you just don't eat that food, or you start to look into the science of food, and you can look at the logic of it. And so the one again of sexual misconduct, talking about it, now we're discussing it. What we don't see in our world, because our view is not the same as Buddha's, he talks about how we live in a desire realm. Desire is called attachment, and it's clear the main attachment we have that even has produced this realm of existence is desire for sexual contact. Sex is just an extra word we put on top of very intense attachment, that's all. Where do you think penises and vaginas came from? It's karmic evolution. Before this human realm, before this human planet, there was a human birth was more subtle. We had subtle light bodies. We didn't have penises and vaginas and mouths and eyes. We didn't have gross senses at all because our minds were more subtle. We had a body of light. There was no gross delusions at all. There was only virtue. You can get enlightened very quickly. So it's degenerate times. And so gradually the imprints of attachment and all the delusions are there. And this is gradually they start to grow. They start to pollute the subtle energies. We literally karmic evolution as we produced a thing called a penis, we produced a thing called a vagina, we produced a thing called reproduction, we produced a thing called the mind's got so excited with so much attachment that these two objects run to each other, and it's now the method we get to get born. I mean, talk about degenerate times. The entire universe is a product of attachment. Attachment is this unbelievably profound, primordial, intense, insane, desperate grasping that has literally created bodies. We've created this universe. We've created the objects of the senses. We've made it all up, and attachment is the one that's made it all up. So Buddha's teachings are about trying to get out of this desire realm. So how do you get out of the desire realm, which is created by samsara, by attachment? You calm down your attachment actions. This goes without saying, you know. So there's just things to think about. We need to think about the logic of it. You can trust your doctor and just don't eat the sugar, or you can want to, because you want to help other people, you can learn to look into it as well. And so the Buddha's view is vast about the samsara and what samsara is and what the desire realm is, you know. I mean, even the way they describe birth and death. When you get reborn, you know, there I was in the intermediate state. Where we are, we're in the intermediate state after our mind left our previous body. And at the time of our death, one of our virtuous karmic seeds of non-killing was triggered. So we already programmed ourselves to go to our present mother's human womb. But we're in the intermediate state, waiting for our new mummy and daddy to hop into bed. And the millisecond that condition ripens, this is why we're driven by attachment. Our mind ran like a magnet in 1 millisecond and rushed. In the case if you're a boy, you ran toward to have sexual union with your mother. You were driven by this intense attachment. And when you got there 1 millisecond later, you got really annoyed because all you could see was the sex organs. And then you get angry because your attachment was thwarted. And then you died from the intermediate state and your mind went into that egg and sperm. And as Lama Zopa says, it is clear that samsara is created by attachment. So it's a much vaster, much more, and especially the one that we label sexual attachment. It's what's created our bodies, what's invented boys and girls. It's what's invented. It's not coming from God. It's not some special gift from God. It's the product of unbelievable, profound, primordial emotional hunger that karmically we've literally created penises and vaginas and whatever else we've got. So we've got to look into all this in the bigger view. You know, what is it? What is samsara? How does it come about? What are the logical steps that create samsara? And if we're trying to unpack samsara, we've got to look into one of the key ones is to give up attachment. And that's why the best is to become a monk or a nun, give up sexual attachment altogether, give up sexual contact altogether. It's obvious. So there's lots of stuff to look into, to think about it. And either Buddha's talking a load of rubbish or there's some logic there, and that's up to us to decide. We're the boss, not Buddha. Anyway, interesting conversation. Thank you for starting it, Pablo. Okay, people, thank you, sweethearts. So we conclude that the law of cause and effect, starting to loosen the grip of ego grasping, starting to loosen the grip of self-pity, poor me, I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, and that we create our own reality. That's the one that begins to loosen the grip of ego grasping. There's no question. Start to become this marvelous person that we can become, you know. All right, darlings. Jangchub semchog rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchig ke panyam pa me pa yang gong ne gong du pelba shog gewa di nudo dag lama sangye drugyone drowa chikyang malupa deyi sala gopa shog. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, people. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Arlene. Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you very much, Venerable Robina.
Thank you, sweethearts. Thank you so much. We'll continue next week. Oh, no, tomorrow. Sorry, not next week. Yes. Tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow morning, UK time. Yes.
It's tomorrow. It's tomorrow afternoon, UK time.
Tomorrow, yeah, morning my time. That's right. Okay, darlings. Much love, everybody. Bye.